It's Trundle Talks. It's Trundle Talks. It's Trundle Talks.
Welcome, Sunil. Thank you for agreeing to be part of Trundle Talks. This is our latest podcast episode where we talk to leaders of Agile and Atlassian space, and we are really excited to have you on board. Specifically because I understand that you're an expert in the security domain, and I love to pick your brains on where in the Agile industry we are specifically lagging behind when it comes to security. So, before we begin, I would like to ask you, what do you think is security? And how do you define it?
Yeah, right. So I think the current enterprise are in sort of an IT paradox, right? On one hand, they want to like provide a very agile and high velocity IT infrastructure, where it has a competitive differentiator. But the cost of security breach for every company on an average in US is $8.19 million. You can imagine, right? So it's a paradox between go faster and innovate, but at the same time trying to be secure, right? And that's where the challenge is. So it's sort of a given thing that security has to be now an integral and important part of any process or any workflow you create within an organization.
Sure. So my question, my first official question too would be that with a lot of focus on collaboration within teams these days, inter-country, within teams, distributed teams, do you see security as an aspect being overlooked?
Well, so I think one of the mandatory requirements when it comes to security is that collaboration plays an very important role, right? I mean, so if you see like the three pillars of security would be culture, process, and tools, right? And so when you say culture, it is about making sure that everybody within the organization is accountable for security, right? So now, how do you make that happen? Is through information sharing, collaborating, teamwork, breaking down those walls which organizations build around their teams, and therefore a lot of information doesn't actually pass through, right? So therefore, once you break down the walls, create a more secure and collaborative environment, a lot of information actually gets exchanged, and thereby you can really bring down your security concerns.
Sure. With that being said, how important do you think security is when an organization, like any consulting organization for that matter, is dealing with clients' data?
Right. So I think a lot of times security has become I mean an afterthought, right? I mean, if you see what's the goal of any organization is to build a high impact, a high value, and a secure product. That's common sense, right? Now, why you find almost 90% of the healthcare, 70 to 80% of the retail industry, more than 60% of the manufacturing places are getting hacked, and the major entry points of these things are through not so secure software, right?
Yeah.
And if you further dig down, right, you'd find that it could be an unintentional insider person who probably it doesn't understand all the aspects of security, whether it is logging in or access control or the person's least privileged mode. He doesn't understand all these different kinds of security practices, and he's trying to access something, and thereby leaving a backdoor entry for somebody to come in, right? So if you look at it, just the most important fundamental requirement for any organization, particularly people who are in the consulting business, is that make your clients aware that the three important thing is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If you ensure these three things are there in any product you are in building or in consulting on, you guarantee security, right? Regardless of your software development life cycle or the management approach, security has to be bolted into the software. It should not be bolted on after the fact. So you have to build security inside the software. It has to be thought through. So when you're consulting and all these things, you have to tell your clients that what's your take on security, right? And a lot of times you'll be surprised that they they might have a team and who are consulted only in the very last leg of the race, or they are asked to come in and they're primarily doing an check boxing, right, to say, hey, did you do this, did you do that? But there are no tools in place for them to really validate all those claims, and then you find that you're half dozen a customer trying to find it out for you, right?
Sure. I get it. That actually brings me to a very good article that I recently read from ThoughtWorks, which said there's this thing in the industry called security sandwich, where a lot of companies are putting some importance to security early phases of development. Then they, end up doing bug testing, fixes, patches. But while in the development process, there's no focus on security. Is that a thing that you feel is hampering the kind of quality of softwares that we are building in the industry?
Yeah, yes, that's a very nice way of putting it, and I would love to read that article. Yeah, so like it's like an well, if it is in a sandwich model, then primarily means somebody is putting this in extra layer as part of some management push, or someone is telling this team that, hey, you need to make sure this I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right? Well, so that primarily because you don't have a culture, within the organization, that security is not an additional add-on item. Nowadays, you talk about security as a code, right? So because it has to, so every time you write in a use case, you also have to write in a misuse case, right? Now, if that kind of thinking has to come through from the development team itself. If you're going to ask a security guy to write it for you, probably then you will have the sandwich problem, because somebody else is telling you to write it. So if the security person is the person who writing it for you, you now create this additional layer of sandwiching. But assuming if the development team himself or the team itself knows that you have to write for every use case, you have to write in in a misuse case. Now you are not creating the sandwich problem. You are now having your security is now ingredient of your main product. So every module or feature or function you write, you have now in a workflow which would take into account use case as well as a misuse case, right? So you're absolutely right, Sajid, that it's as of now it's still very much an enforced model, and people are asking the teams to write to be security aware. But that'll take time to transition into a more what do you call it, self-aware development team who understand this security better.
Yeah, and I totally agreed, Sunil. And I also feel somewhere in between, I think the frameworks or the methodologies that we are using, like for example, talk about Scrum, talk about Kanban, less, talk about SAFe. I've been part of a lot of organizations, a lot of teams who follow these methodologies and frameworks. Nowhere in between is security talked about as something that is ingredient, as a key ingredient to the mix. Every time it's always faster delivery or client collaboration. It's always get the product out as soon as possible, as soon as humanly possible. And somewhere between that, the aspect of security, the aspect of risk management, the putting an extra thought of, right, as you said, writing the misuse cases, that is being missed. So how do you feel something that can be added on or that can be incorporated in the framework that the teams use to make sure, like kind of like a checklist item or something, maybe a process add-on that they could do so that these check balances are in place?
Right. And again, right. I mean, being an software developer and being in the on the R&D side for over 20 plus years, building products, right? I think one of the mantras I follow is that, I mean, if you look at what's the real goal of any team, very simple, is to deliver a high quality product faster.
Sure.
The faster is very important because you don't have time nowadays because extreme competitive nature of the business you're in, right? Now, if you really dig deeper into the two of these phrases, high quality and faster, right? What do you mean by high quality? It basically means minimal number of bugs. It meets the compliancy requirements. There is no security flaws, right?
Yeah.
These are the so quality doesn't mean just about usability. It also means all these things is also met. Now, if you look at faster part of it, right? It's all about agility. Can you deliver a model that can adapt to the market needs faster?
Sure.
Can you be competitive enough that you can prioritize on feature which drives maximum value, right? So all these things are important. So as a simple definition of security is this: only the code in production has value. Everything else is work in place, right?
Sure.
Work in process. Everything else. Now, how do you get code in production? Is that the code needs to meet these two attributes: high quality and faster. And it is imperative, and I cannot emphasize this more, that the time has come now that the security is not an add-on or a thinking that you want to bring from an external entity into a dev or an QA team. It has to be a culture. Like, in fact, I would say that test first in design methodology is probably a very good way to
Yeah.
get started, where you first write in misuse cases, then you create test cases to it and test your code. Like, well, of course your functionality will break because you don't have a code for that. But the moment you sort of start seeing things from an testing point of view, you now have a very strong security like in mindset built into it, right? So again, I hope I hope I answered your
Good.
question. But that's my mantra. Like, that's what I believe in all the time.
Awesome. Uh, Another aspect, Sunil, that I would want you to just shed some light on is, so we've talked about when the product is being developed. What about when it's already developed and out there? How can a company introspect and look at what's the potential, hazard that could happen in the future, that they could backtrace on something that is already live, already working, and how can they potentially limit something which could cause an issue in the future?
Right. I mean, so there are like tools available to create a very strong feedback loops. Right. It's all about making sure you're able to get logs, telemetry data, or you should be able to get trace dumps and stack dumps and all this stuff, right? So if you already have those things in place, probably you can create a very good prediction model to see like when exactly you might break again, right? And based on your current existing bugs, or and this way, like these are all, I would say, and reactive models. Probably it's not a good way, because the ship has already left and it's started sailing. But again, if you have a very good logging process, at least you can identify your your hotspots, right?
Mhm.
And that creates a trend model for you to kind of then create you start looking into that. Can you do, for example, if you really want to like migrate your legacy code into a cloud architecture, and you already have an legacy code running, and then you find that it's it's good code, but it was written 10 to 15 years back, and probably you don't have enough support available for that. You can use strangler pattern. So strangler pattern allows you to sort of slowly start to what do you call re-engineer certain functionalities into and you basically like create new modules. It's like an strangler vine, like that kill the existing tree. So that's all very common patterns used by industry experts when they want to what do you call, re-engineer their existing code into a cloud-based model, right? So I'm just giving you an example, right? And A lot of times it's always good to sort of port, if you can, to a newer set of tools and technologies. Don't assume that, hey, if the code is running well, it's fine, right? Well, your demand, the usage pattern, all these things has gone up and exponentially high. I mean, if you take data from at least even 10 years back, probably the number of users trying to access your product is probably I would say one fourth than what they were trying to access now. Right? So the amount of data access and the amount of people trying to log on. I'm just talking about any B2C application, right? Or even in the case of B2B, right? The kind of workflows and the operating environment you are now exposed to are very different from that what you used to see 10 to 15 years back, right? So things are evolving so fast, and therefore it's not right for you to have pretty legacy app, in my viewpoint, running still. Try to see if you could do an re-architecture, re-engineer, and use strangler pattern, all those things to kind of bring more. You basically make smaller changes, smaller and subtle changes, and move it into a new operating paradigm.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sunil, for being on the podcast.
No worries. Really appreciate this time. Thanks a lot, Sajit.
Thanks, Sunil. Have a good day.
You too.
Hey, 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 Trundle Talks, it's Trundle Talks.